Hey, good day, everybody, and welcome to your Ruby Live event. My name is Eric Wynkoop. I'm the Director of Culinary Instruction at Ruby, as well as one of the chef instructors in your courses. Today, it's my office hours, and I want to thank you twice. I want to thank you for joining me today for this particular event, um, where you get a chance to pose questions regarding food and cooking, and I will do my best to respond to them. And, as we get started, I would like to point out a couple of housekeeping items. And the first one is if you would like to participate in a more direct fashion, you're welcome to post a question or a comment by using the dialog box in the upper right-hand corner of your screen that's labeled Add Question Here. And that'll make its way to the queue that you see on the right-hand side of your screen. And there's already a number of questions populating the right-hand side of the screen. And as you look at those questions, look at an individual question, you'll see a heart-shaped icon. And if you would like that particular question addressed sooner than later, go ahead and click on the heart-shaped icon and it'll bump it up in priority. Okay, but otherwise, I'll get to all the questions. Okay, and let's go ahead and start today's program. Before I jump into the questions, what I'd like to do is talk a little bit about ingredient substitutions. And it looks like this might even dovetail with one of the questions down below from Laura. But just as a topic, a broad topic that I want to talk about, because I receive questions from students on a fairly regular basis on how to make substitutions and what can I use and so on and so forth. In fact, I just responded to one this morning, which is what prompted me to address this issue right now. So let me answer the issue or respond to this in two different ways. Okay, so number one, there's the specific scenario of making an ingredient substitution for an assignment that you will submit to us, okay, in one of your courses. Now, in that situation, right, generally speaking, you can make a substitution if there is a food allergy or some other proscription that causes you to avoid a particular ingredient. However, the change to the recipe must not affect the learning outcomes of that particular activity as it relates to that lesson. Okay. And many times, if it's a small change, like you want to pull out apple cider vinegar and you want to use champagne vinegar instead, that's probably not a problem. But if you start to pull out some other more significant ingredients, such that the end product is altered or changed significantly, then there could be an issue. In other words, points will be deducted, or you may be asked to redo the assignment. So, in a situation where you want to make a substitution, perhaps a product is unavailable in your area, for example, and you're not sure just what the best course of action would be, I encourage you to reach out to us first so that we can have a conversation and find a solution that meets all of our needs. Okay, and the first place to look is usually the Q&A function at the bottom of the given task page. You'll notice that each task page has a Q&A function that is tied to the content of that page. So in the case of an assignment page, you can click on the Q&A function, again, at the bottom of the page toward the right side, and you can scroll through some of the questions to see if it's been asked already, or you can ask a new question, and then we will respond to it. Okay, and another method to reach us is via support@ruby.com. Either way, please include enough detail to really paint a good picture of the context so that we can respond with the most accurate answer. Okay. Otherwise, it might require a couple of additional rounds of messaging to clarify what it is that is happening. Okay, so then the other scenario is the more general cooking scenario, like in your day-to-day life and life beyond Ruby, if there is such a thing, right? Where you want to make a substitution. Okay, so the strategy basically is to ask yourself, as you look at the original ingredient, ask yourself, how does this function in the recipe? What does it do in the recipe? And there are a number of different functions, right, that a given recipe could have. Sometimes it's a singular function, sometimes it's a multiple functions. And so we need to address all of those and then figure out if we want to make a replacement of all of those functions, or can we live with just maybe two of the three functions that we substitute for. Okay, so for example, I think the obvious ones are things like flavor, there's taste, there's aroma, color, texture, and then other things like thickening ability or binding ability, especially when it comes to something like a vegetable, or plant-based burger patty. Okay, as an example. And so on and so forth, right? There might be some others that we could come up with, but so we need to think about the function and then what might replicate that function. And so, let's just say, for example, that you don't like garlic. Okay, so garlic provides a flavor and aroma. Okay. And so as we pull that out, we want to think about something that will be kind of sort of similar, right, in terms of that interest, that flavor aroma interest. And a lot of times other members of I think it's the allium genus, whether it's chives or shallots or scallions or onions, something in that grouping will make a good substitute. Now, sometimes a person is abstaining from that whole group of ingredients, in which case we might reach for something like Asafoetida, which comes from the spice category. It's a plant resin that's often used as a substitute for onions and has a sort of an oniony, garlicky aroma to it. Now, other times, the substitution is even more difficult, and we might not find something that is a really close, facsimile or otherwise mimics those characteristics of the original. So we need to be prepared to make a departure, in terms of, let's say, flavor or taste, as we choose the substituting ingredient. Okay. But think about function first, and then try to align on as many of those points as you can. Also, here's a very important point: when we make a change to a recipe, it's reasonable to expect that the finished product will be different from the original. Okay, and this is certainly true when we're adapting a meat or animal product based recipe to a plant based recipe. Very often those functions are very difficult to replicate in a specific specifically aligned sort of way. So keep in mind that it is reasonable, right, that we change our expectations. And understand that expectations become a mental exercise. Okay, so here we talk about food psychology to some extent, where, in my opinion, anyway, as we approach these sorts of changes and getting used to changes, that it's 90% mental, and at least that's what I say to myself. And so allow yourself, your palate, your body, your mind to make the shift to a new product, essentially, when you start to change ingredients, especially big ingredients, major ingredients. And with time, whether it's lower sugar content, lower salt content, a different texture, maybe a different way of presenting the food, uh, with time we get used to that new something, and we can find enjoyment in that beautiful food that you created, after all. Okay, and so those are my thoughts on substitutions. Next, let's go ahead and jump into the questions, all right, that are in the queue. All right, so the first one, is from Laura, and looks like it is on the topic of substitutions. Let me go ahead and just read through this to make sure I've covered everything. When you want to replace one or more ingredients in a recipe, what criteria do you suggest following in order to choose the best substitution? Okay, check. I think similar taste, flavor, aroma, and texture are good pointers, but wonder whether there are more. Okay, great. I appreciate the prompt, Laura, and it sounds like I addressed the two parts to your question. And I suggest to you and to everybody that you just give this process a try, and it's experience, right, that will get you to the finish line. And so get into the kitchen and cook with an open mind. Right? Thank you. Okay, next question from Trish. Any recommendations for substituting green pepper or a recipe with significant amount of black pepper? Okay, so let's clarify a term here. So green pepper could mean green peppercorn, but it is often used in reference to a bell pepper, which gets us to the category of capsicums, where I think of just any green chili. Okay, so let's talk about this. If you're talking about green peppercorns, I would say, first of all, just pull it out of the product. It's the preparation. Green peppercorns are provided as a bit of a flavoring element, but try it first without that, and same thing with black pepper. Either cut back on the quantity or just omit it and see how you like the product. That's going to be the first thing to do. If we're talking about capsicums, right, or bell peppers or other chilies, let's address bell peppers. Bell peppers are a pretty mild, right, usually 0 heat on the Scoville scale, green vegetable that provides often a crunchy element, right, some moisture, visually, right, something pleasing to look at. So, think about, again, one or more ingredients that might satisfy those different functions. And so, it could be leeks, it could be bulb onion, um, um, it could be celery, right? It could be a combination of those things. Again, it's going to change the outcome of the dish, but still hopefully be satisfying to your palate experience. And if we're talking about green colored chilies that have heat, I would follow the same approach as the black pepper, reduce the quantity, right? Or omit the ingredient entirely and see how you like it. I don't know specifically why you want to omit these. So I'm just throwing out some different scenarios that I would address, broadly speaking. Okay, thank you. Okay, and then from Mary Lou. I've been preparing a peanut sauce for a red cabbage, carrots, snow peas, and onions over quinoa preparation. Can I substitute real ground peanuts for peanut butter to minimize the oil and sugar content? I realize nuts are higher in calories. Yeah, by all means, feel free to go back to the original source of the peanut butter, the old ground nut, right, or the goober. And You can grind them in an electric grinder. You can use a mortar and pestle. Understand that in order to get the smoothness of smooth peanut butter anyway, it might take a little bit of time to get where you're going. Probably a lot easier with an electric appliance, however. But you also might experiment with some different degrees of texture that you can control then if you're working with the original peanut. All right, thank you. All right, and the next question. I'm very interested in learning as much as possible about starting a catering business, as that is what I'd like to do. Do you recommend any resources as a good place to start, like an online course? Well, let me start with your second question. As far as an online course goes, I would recommend Ruby, right, as far as the cooking foundation is concerned. And if you're interested in starting a business, I recommend a broad base, a broad foundation. And, with that in mind, I would point you to one of our longer courses. There's the Pro Cook course at 6 months, and then also the Pro Plant course, also at 6 months in duration approximately. And, those go into much more depth and breadth than our shorter courses. And so for someone who is, looking into the future through the an entrepreneurial lens, I would suggest that deeper foundation. Okay. The other thing to consider is the business aspect of the business. Okay, so there's the cooking and the food and all of that on one side, that creative side of the business. But then there's the business side, and whether it's the marketing and the budgeting and cost control, labor scheduling, and so on and so forth. So this is where a business plan is very helpful. And I like to direct students to an organization called SCORE. I'm here in the U.S. and the SCORE, the resources are available in person as well. But go to SCORE, SCORE.org for their website. You'll see a lot of resources online, including a guide of some sort that'll walk you through the process of creating a business plan. Okay, now a business plan in its sort of traditional long form can be a pain in the backside to develop, but I recommend that you go down that path because it will help you address so many questions that are part of the business startup process and even issues that come up afterwards. Okay, and without this sort of guidance and this sort of testing of sorts, you're not going to get a chance necessarily to address all of these issues that are pretty important to starting a business. And I will also add, in terms of the context of a food-related business, especially something like catering, or it could be a standalone restaurant, cafe, regardless of the size, is that there are a number of idiosyncrasies that are associated with our industry. And you really need to address those issues before you open your doors, so to speak, or literally, in order to understand, what's going on. And this is where the business plan can help you do that. Okay. Another, just a starting point that'll just take you an hour or so is to look at our archived live events where at some point in the past, I talk about food cost calculation. This is one area of a business startup that many people overlook. And, during my years doing consulting, with new startups that have gotten into some sort of trouble, I have discovered that many folks have not taken the time to cost out recipes. So what that means is that on one hand you have your menu price, right, that the customer pays, and that's your revenue, right? That's your money coming in from the sale of that item. But behind that number, you have what's called food costs, and that is the expense that you incurred for the ingredients that went into that dish for that single portion, okay, or whatever size of single unit you're selling. Okay, it could be a full cake, could be one slice, for example. Okay, and so we need to know both of those numbers in order to have the most control over that area of the expense picture. Okay, and what recipe cost calculation requires is that you cost out every single ingredient that goes into every single recipe on your menu. And it's a tedious process. It takes a little bit of time to do, but once you have it in place, you only need to make updates periodically based upon changes to the recipe or changes to pricing for those ingredients. Okay, but it is very important to do that calculation. And so do take a look at that archived live event that Patrick has linked for us on the screen here, including a link to score.org. All right, so I hope those resources are helpful for you. And next, let's see, we've got a message from Lisa. Hello. I'm in the process of starting a vegan personal chef business. I would love any tips or words of advice you can impart to a newbie. Okay, so yeah, I think I shared a few of those sort of primary thoughts, right, that always come to my mind when it comes to any type of a business startup, and especially a food business startup, as my life is concerned. Okay. But otherwise, do adequate market research. This is all part of the business plan. Do thorough market research, understand who your audience is, who you're targeting as your primary audience, and then understand who your secondary audience could be. And then, understand ingredient quality, understand cooking methods. I think the cooking part of it, right, the skill development and all that know-how that goes into the food prep itself is very, very important, because this can be a place where you save money, right, or waste money, for example. So, develop those cooking skills and the cooking know-how at the same time. All right, thank you. All right, we've got a question from Audi. Hello, welcome back. Is there a difference between umami and MSG? Is the anti-MSG sentiment in the USA based on real science or hearsay? I have always looked for non-MSG food products, but now I am confused and wondering if we have all been misled. Well, let's see here. I don't know. You have a few different questions here, so let me answer them one by one. Is umami and MSG the same? Are they different? So let me first say that MSG, on one hand, is a natural occurring substance within us. It's also a synthesized product that can be added to food as an ingredient. And the concept of umami, okay, so this comes from the Japanese, and umami refers to this aspect of sometimes called savoriness, sometimes called deliciousness, of pertaining to the food. And we think of it as this another aspect of taste. Now, in the US, when we have adopted this term umami, I think, unfortunately, it has been simplistically linked to MSG. And yes, the original premise of umami, 100 or so years ago, was based upon the discovery of glutamates and that whole story. And from that point, the substance was synthesized and then sold as a table condiment, which you can still buy today in grocery stores. And I grew up in Japan, and I grew up with a shaker of MSG on the table from Ajinomoto. And but culturally speaking, this idea of developing umami in your food is much more than adding mushrooms, right, or a dash of soy sauce, or a shake of MSG, if that's what you prefer. It's really an effort to layer flavors, to make the palate experience more complex, and therefore deeper and more satisfying. And so, yes, it might mean adding a dash of soy sauce. It could be the addition of sugar, or salt, right, or miso paste. But it could also mean um, adding deeper caramelization via that dry heat cooking method, which is part of that deeper development of flavor. And as we know, along with flavor, aroma becomes an important component as well. And so, where possible, try to address that component of the food too, such as using fresh herbs to finish a dish, as one approach. Okay. Is the anti-MSG sentiment in the U.S. based on science or hearsay? I'm sure right? That's why you're asking this question. But the literature out there is inconclusive, in my opinion. There are folks that have taken, a science approach. In other words, they've applied the scientific method in some fashion to try to figure this out. And the conclusions that I have read have been muddled. With some people saying that there really isn't any scientific explanation to the headaches, the red flushed cheeks, and other effects that people seem to experience, seem to link to the consumption of MSG right after eating certain foods or dining in certain places consistently. Now, at the same time, then, if the science is inconclusive, yet we still have people that are consistently experiencing these symptoms of something, I think that still needs to be addressed. Okay, and so that's why, in my mind, it's inconclusive. Although some people on the science side might say it is conclusive. There's nothing out there, and this is where I would say that perhaps the limitation of the scientific method is at issue here, meaning that the scientific method, will look at some discrete something that's part of a bigger picture. And if the actual issue lies outside of that discrete something that's being investigated, then the real issue will not be stumbled upon until the science advances, right, or progresses in a way until it finally addresses that area of concern that is at the heart of what's going on. And so, it's possible that if the scientific inquiry keeps looking at this particular issue, then at some point we might find some different answers. But I don't know. Is it real or is it not? I'll leave that up to the audience. Perhaps we're still confused and still wondering. So, my particular thought is, hey, if the idea of adding MSG to your food is of any concern, causes any anxiety, any stress, then simply avoid it. And that's my approach to any sort of thing that you might consume, whether it's salt or fat or sugar or something else, if it causes you anxiety, if it causes you any stress, then stop doing it. That's going to be a quick solution. Okay, or you can consider some in-between solution, like backing off on the quantity that's consumed. Okay, thank you. All right, so Sally is asking, why or when would you use shallots instead of onions? Personal preference is a big part of that. Tradition is also a big part of that. And those are the two, I would say, driving forces between the selection of one ingredient over another, when it comes to items that have some similarities. Okay. So, very often we'll come across dishes in regional cooking from around the world where a particular item is requested, but you don't have it, so it seems like a substitution would work reasonably well. And so, why not just use that substitute on an ongoing basis? Well, it just depends, right? If you want to be a little bit more true to the history of that dish, the regional preferences, right, of the people that are most closely associated with that dish, then we might try to reach for, in this case, shallots rather than something else from that genus. Shallots and onions generally are a little bit different in flavor. Of course, it depends on what sort of onions we're talking about. There are Walla Walla sweets, and there are red onions and yellow onions, and Spanish yellows and red onions. And so each one has a slightly different characteristic. So in other words, if you compare any of these things, whether it's shallots to onions or these different onions to one another, you're going to find some slight differences in texture, in their heat intensity, their pungency, how long the flavor lingers on the palate, how well it stands up to heat through the cooking process, how it presents on the plate, how it fries up, if that's the cooking method we're talking about, right, or something else. And so, I recommend that you do some experimentation to see if you discern the difference, number one, and then number two, if that difference is meaningful to you. Okay, that's an important one, right? And sometimes we notice the difference, but it's not a big deal. I'm just going to use an onion in place of a shallot, and that could well be fine, in all of your cooking, right? But in some contexts, you could be called out for it, especially in a professional context where you're feeding the public, and you have diners, you have customers that tend to be more critical of your cooking when they're paying for it, right? Versus a house guest whom you have invited to dinner. They tend to be more gracious, all right? So that's my explanation on shallots and onions and many, many other ingredients that fall into a similar situation, okay? Give it a try, and you're going to deepen your understanding. Thank you. All right, Kathleen is asking, what brand name of nonstick skillets do you prefer? Non-stick skillets, non-stick cookware of any sort. Here's my spiel. I think of them as disposable items because over time they will accumulate scratches. And once you get to a point of accumulation, then it's no longer non-stick, and you'll need to replace the pan. And that could come very quickly, or it might come 3 or 4 or 5 years from now, and depending on how you use the pan and how it's cared for. Okay, so with that in mind, I first of all don't recommend buying a set of non-stick cookware. I recommend purchasing a single pan, maybe two, depending on what your needs are. And, in terms of where I go and what I buy, I go down the street to the restaurant supply store, and I will just pick up something off the shelf. And it's not pretty. So if presentation is important, then this might not be the best answer. But for me, I'm in there to cook, and I have all kinds of cookware. It's a mismatched motley collection, and the nonstick pan that I use is what I used to use in a professional kitchen. And what I have seen most recently is Volrath brand pans. And I think that's what I still have downstairs in the kitchen. Volrath is a company in Sheboygan, Wisconsin, and they make a lot of different things for professional kitchens. And so Volrath, I'd recommend, but probably most anything else at the local restaurant supply store. All right. Thank you. All right, next up from Joseph. Is there a difference in the taste profile of garlic that is minced with a knife, grated, or pressed? Which do you think is best? Wow, this is a really interesting question. This is a nuanced question. And, I will, let me first say, I don't know, because I've never done a side-by-side comparison of these methods of processing garlic. Okay, however, on one hand, these different methods could produce very, very slight differences, right, in aroma. But I would guess that the differences would be so subtle that you really have to stick your nose up to them to notice the difference, if you could at all, in some cases. Okay, because these are all fairly manual methods, even though you're using mechanical, sort of tools, right? A knife or a press or a grater of some sort. They're pretty slow speed, and therefore, I think the results are going to be largely similar. However, let's compare those results to the results when using an electric appliance, like a coffee grinder sort of appliance. Now, if you were to make that comparison, the difference would probably be much more noticeable. Okay, and I know I have noticed it in the past. And I've noticed it with other things as well. For example, with parsley. That's been processed in a food processor, right, versus with a knife on a cutting board. And the tendency there, right, is to realize harsher notes from the electric appliance, okay, where the cell structure is ruptured in different ways. It releases, different aromatic compounds, and the result is a little bit harsher, and it is, at least for my palate, noticeable. Okay, I hope that larger context might help as well, Joseph. But give it a try. These three methods, and see which one you like. I know I've used all three, in the not too distant past, and I don't know why I chose one over the other necessarily. I don't have that memory right now, but give it a try and see if you prefer one over the other. Thank you. All right, Kathleen asks, what brands of tahini do you consider to be of high quality? I got to say, I'm not up to speed on all of the tahini brands out there, but the brand that I have in my pantry right now is called Mid-East, and I've been buying that for a long time. And it contains one ingredient, which I like in my tahini. And that's what I would consider you look for too. Brands can probably vary in this case. All right, thank you. And Kathleen has another question. I have a pressure cooker. Can I make some of the recipes for Instapot in my old-time pressure cooker and just reduce the time for cooking? Okay, so nice question here. Let me address the the Instant Pot brand name, right? Is a brand of electric pressure cooker. It's one of these multi-function pressure cookers, and So, in addition to pressure cooking, you can do things like saute and steam and slow cook. You can even bake a cake, in these things. And they're really convenient, right? They've got these preset buttons that have the timing preset for certain categories of foods like beans, right, or vegetables or rice or something else. And keep in mind, first of all, right, that the electric pressure cooker, presets typically have some adjustability. In other words, you can go in and manually adjust that time to suit your personal preference. Okay, and so when you use an Instant Pot or an Insignia brand electric pressure cooker, whatever the brand is, keep in mind that you get to make some adjustments as well, and you may not like the results of the preset buttons, and so keep that in mind, right? And then let's take a look at your old-time pressure cooker, Kathleen. So I have an old-time pressure cooker, stovetop model, that I still use, and the stovetop model, because it has no preset buttons, of course, you need to take notes. At least that's my recommendation. Take notes so that you know how much time it will require to cook certain foods. And you got to figure out what the variables are, right? What the food is, how much is in the pot, how much water you put in the pot, and how many whistles it will take to cook that item, and there are other factors to consider as well. And so when you transition from an electric pressure cooker to a stovetop model, it's not as simple as reducing the cooking time. Okay. You might start out with something comparable, right, in terms of cooking time. And then you'll make some adjustments from there, and it could go up or could go down based upon heat intensity, which burner you use, how many BTUs of heat are coming into contact with the pan, and so on and so forth. So there's some experimentation. Take notes, refer to your notes subsequently when you cook with your old-time cooker, and you'll find that you can produce a wonderful food, in either appliance, actually. Okay, either one takes some practice. Enjoy. Thank you. Okay, got another question from Laura. Thank you. I have learned a little about starches, but am confused about which is best in what preparation between arrowroot powder, corn, potato, tapioca. Can you mention examples of dishes where you would use each of these 4 ingredients? Well, let's see. I'm not sure if I'm going to come up with examples off the top of my head here. But my first recommendation is to follow the recipe and to go with the suggestion of the author, right? The recipe author. All of these have quite a bit of overlap, right, in function, as a starch thickener. Some of these items are more common in certain regions of the world than they are in others, and that's why we might see them more commonly associated with certain cuisines. And then some of these items have different characteristics, such as how they hold up to freezing, or how they hold up to long-term heat, right, such as a longer-term simmer. And so those are all things that you might take a look at on the great wide web, right, in terms of some additional information. Okay, but understanding that broader context, I hope, will be helpful as you come to understand better which you might choose as a substitute in some situation or another. Thank you. All right, question from Bob. I'm allergic to any alcohol, even when alcohol is burned away. Is there a good substitute for deglazing? Yes. Generally we think about deglazing liquid as a flavorful liquid, and stock works very well, and that's usually my first choice. If alcohol is not an option, okay. And short of having stock on hand, water is quite fine, okay. And so try those two. All right. Thank you. And look who's back. Got another question from Kathleen. What kind of cutting boards do you recommend, plastic versus wood? Do plastic boards dull your knives? I recommend both plastic and wood. I use both. I have bamboo boards as well. There are many different types of wood cutting boards to choose from as well, whether it's maple or acacia or hemlock or something else. And I think any of them are fine. Does plastic dull your knives? Over time it will, but so will wood. Really my guideline for choosing a cutting board is to avoid very hard surfaces. And I've seen cutting boards of glass and stainless steel, and those I avoid. But others in the plastic and wood categories, the fiber categories, are quite fine with me. Now, if you do some reading of discussions online, you're going to find a lot of hair splitting around which woods to choose and which fibers to avoid. And people will reference the Rockwell scale of hardness and this and that. I say, let's just get down to cooking. And you got to maintain your knives on a daily basis. Otherwise store them properly. Try to preserve the cutting edge, and then sharpen them when they need sharpened. Okay, but plastic or wood, either way is fine. All right, thank you. All right, next question. Please add bamboo to the question consideration of plastic and wood cutting boards. I heard bamboo dulls boards, and that plastic harbors bacteria where wood neutralizes. Yes, yes, yes. Kind of, sort of, I think is probably my response to all of that. I mean, all the things you state, I think, are accurate. But again, I maintain my knives on a daily basis in terms of putting them on a steel, and then I sharpen them occasionally when they need it. And so, again, the type of cutting board is not a big deal as long as I'm not using stainless steel or glass. And does plastic harbor bacteria? Maybe. I think part of that depends on how you clean it as well. Plastic tends to clean pretty well, but I think the concern is after use, some sort of cut lines or cut grooves can develop. And the concern is that bacteria will be harbored in those tight spaces. And maybe so, but that doesn't concern me the slightest. I, in fact, welcome bacteria in my environment to kind of keep things healthy, keep things lively, keep my immunity up. I try not to, over sanitize things, for example. I don't think that's of a great benefit in the long term. In fact, there are some relatively recent studies that would attest to that regarding wood and its ability to naturally neutralize pathogens. I think that's true to some extent. I think there's probably some literature out there that would support that. But once again, I think you still need to clean your board adequately, just to avoid the buildup of any dangerous funk, which could be of concern. Okay. Regarding bacteria, I love this topic. And let me take a bit of a tangent here and talk about food safety and sanitation. So, we talk a lot about food safety and sanitation. Cleanliness, number one, sanitation as a second step. And, we reference pathogens. Pathogens are disease-causing microorganisms, okay? And it's a real concern, especially in environments where there's a lot of food processing, for example, in the United States. And the issue is that we don't know, right, when there's a pathogen on our food that could be transferred to the cutting board, and that process is called cross-contamination. Okay, we don't know if it's a pathogen or just any old everyday bacteria. Okay, so the everyday bacteria is not a concern for most people most of the time. The presence of a pathogen could be a concern for a lot of people a lot of the time. Okay, and so this is where number one, proper cooking of the food is going to be very important. Okay, and otherwise, using your refrigerator strategically in order to protect what we call the time temperature principle, where we want to avoid a long period of time at warmer ambient temperatures, because of course that will foster the growth, the multiplication of microorganisms. And those become particularly troublesome if they are pathogens, okay? Now keep in mind, that pathogens often are not present, but we emphasize sanitation because we don't know when they might be present, okay? So the other, more common category of microorganism are these other bacterias, and they could be yeasts and other things. And these are generally referred to as spoilage bacteria. And they're, of course, all over everything, right? We really can't help that. And that's what causes food to break down over time. Foods will spoil after 5, 6, 7, 8 days in the refrigerator. Lettuce will start to change and so on and so forth after a few days in the refrigerator. Those might give us a little tummy ache, but probably won't kill us. That's the good news. The other good news is that with spoilage bacteria, they do produce off textures and changes in aroma and taste that we can pick up. So we can often detect those things beforehand. Okay, so I just want to provide some of that broader context, right, to this topic of cleaning cutting boards and the topic of bacteria. Thank you. Hello, Colette. Is it okay to freeze tofu and tempeh? And if so, is it best before or after cooking? So the quick answer is yes. Keep in mind that when we freeze things, right, the development of ice crystals will, push things apart, right? Water expands, and so those crystals get big. And so fine textured food, like soft tofu, for example, silken tofu, will change in structure as those ice crystals will kind of push apart and loosen up the structure of the tofu in particular. And now that is usually experienced less so with the firmer types of tofu. So I see extra firm, I see firm, for example. Okay. Tempeh is going to be affected too, but less so. Tempeh is generally more coarse in texture, and it stands up to the freeze-thaw cycle a little more gracefully than tofu does. The other thing to keep in mind with tofu is that the freeze-thaw cycle tends to push out water, so that once it's thawed, it'll have a tougher, sort of a more spongy texture to it. Okay, so you end up with a different product in the end. So be aware of that as well. Is it best to do it before or after cooking? It can go either way. General recommendation would be to cut it into smaller pieces. For example, slabs or even a dice, if that would reflect how you might use it afterwards. And then experiment and see, from a convenience standpoint and a texture standpoint, whether you prefer to do it before cooking or after cooking. All right, thank you. All right, from Graham. Knife skills. A consistent cube shape seems easier with vegetables you can square off, like potatoes and carrots. What's the best way to deal with irregular shapes like peppers and celery? Yeah, we're going to, if you, look at something like a bell pepper, and we open it up, and then looking at it from the top, we're going to do our best to make cuts that are at 90-degree angles so that we can cut out pieces that most closely resemble our target, right? Whether it's a small dice or a large dice or something else, okay? And consistency, of course, is going to be a big part of that. And then, certainly they're not going to be a cube at that point because a bell pepper may only be this thick, but when you turn it up on its side, it'll be a 1/2 inch by 1/2 inch, closely resembling, that medium dice target. Okay. And then any recommendations on recipes for brunoise small dice practice? I would say roll those things into sauces or soups or rice dishes or bean dishes or legume dishes. So a pilaf, for example, could be a great recipient of any brunoise or small dice practice. Thank you. Kathleen says, can you use a cast iron skillet on a glass top range? I don't have the definitive word on that. I would say take a look at your oven user's manual or reach out to the manufacturer to see what they recommend. All right, thank you. Right, next question. I want a Blixer food processor. There are so many. I just want a great food processor for a residential kitchen that has the ability to scrape the bowl when using. The Blixer was mentioned in the class with a link, but there are so many. Any suggestions? Consider what size you might need. Blixers, a Blixer, by the way, for the rest of the audience, is a food processor made by the Wynkoop company. And Wynkoop, at least in the US, tends to be a very popular food processor in commercial kitchens. They are powerful, they come in many different sizes, and they tend to be a bit spendy, as is the Blixer. And the Blixer is the only one that I'm familiar with that has that scraping mechanism built in, which is super convenient. But they also start at about $1,500. So, think about what your budget is and also what size you need, right, in terms of the bowl capacity, and then go shopping. Have fun. Thank you. All right, next up, when the task says tomatoes seeded, does it mean remove seeds or leave them in? Seeded could go either way. Yes, good question. I hear this every once in a while. The term seeded is kind of new for a lot of people, but it does mean removed, right? I'll give you another example. When we peel a potato, right, we remove the peel and we say that the potato is peeled. So in the same way, the word seeded is used in this context. Thank you. Hello, Andre. See, how can you use the techniques from the program to specific cuisine? I love to cook Cajun and Creole inspired dishes, but I know the professional chef program gives the fundamentals of cooking without focusing on a specific cuisine. Yes, the idea is that across the board, cooking in general, I mean, for the most part, we can certainly find exceptions, but for the most part, cooking involves some processing of food with a knife. So knife skill development, knife skills, right, are going to be important. And the application of heat is part of the cooking process. So when we talk about application of heat, we're talking about controlling time and temperature, right? Controlling the temperature, right, or the intensity of the heat and the duration of the application of the heat. And so that's what we teach via the different dry heat methods and the different moist heat cooking methods. And then you get into other areas of flavor development through caramelization, through the building of a foundation by using perhaps onions or ginger or garlic. Chilies could be a part of that. Maybe you're building that up further with the addition of herbs and spices before you add your main ingredients. And then you wrap things up with a further adjustment and refinement, right, of the aromas and flavors and taste, maybe with an adjustment of sweetener to temper acidity, and so on and so forth. And so these are the things that we teach. And these are foundational building blocks to cooking across the board. And whether it's Korean cooking or Cajun cooking or Mexican cooking, you will use these basic approaches to the food. Okay. Now, to your point, as you drill deeper into the nuances of that given regional cuisine, yes, you bet. There are differences, right, that we associate with a specific regional cuisine, and that's where that's your further studies, but you can sort of layer those techniques on the foundation, right, that we teach through our courses. Thank you. All right, another question here. Does it matter if we progress through class and go back to certain parts? Must it be sequential for proper scoring as long as photo submission assignments are done sequentially? Sometimes I want to keep learning without stopping to DO when away from home. So we recommend that you progress through the course sequentially. It makes some sense in terms of skill building, I'll say. And now when it comes to an assignment, I would say submit an assignment and then just keep on going, right? There's certainly no reason to wait for an assignment. It'll be critiqued in the next, couple, 3 days or so. And, but we do generally recommend, right, that you move through our courses in the sequence that we have built for you. Okay. Thank you. All right, another question from Andre. When submitting mise en place pics, do the measurements have to be seen? And for step 2, what part of the cooking process should we submit for a picture, just for clarification? So yeah, great questions. For mise en place, we recommend ideally that you measure out according to the recipe all of your ingredients, including the small things. And that gives us a chance to see your ratios, right, of those ingredients that you're using. And it gives us a chance of what to expect in the finished dish. And that's also, a reason why we ask that things be taken out of packages and placed into, smaller pinch bowls, right, or mise en place bowls. And, the measurements specifically don't have to be labeled. I mean, we have access to the recipe and, we can see what the quantity should be according to the recipe. Okay. And then for the in-process step, generally speaking, we will give you some guidance on what it is that we want to see, whether it's, a spoon that is holding some of the sauce so that we can see the viscosity of the sauce, right? Or you want to see a spoon that's pulled through the risotto that's midway through the process so that we can see how you're pulling the starches out of the grains and starting to develop that creamy consistency. And so we will label what it is that we want to see. There is the occasional assignment where you get to choose a key in-process step and show us what that is. Okay? I hope that's helpful. Thank you. All right, next question. What made whole food plant-based cooking a passion for you? For me, I'm going to say that my passion, my enthusiasm, my engagement is really with food and cooking generally, and the plant cooking is. It jumps out for a couple of reasons. One is its variety. There is just so much to choose from in terms of ingredients. And as you move around the world, there are so many traditions to tap into and things to learn when it comes to handling vegetables and fruits and all those other things from the plant world. So there's going to be a variety, and then also there's certainly a health component that interests me, so whether a person is 100% plant-based or they are incorporating more plants along the way, either one is certainly fine with me, I think there's going to be a health benefit long term to incorporating more plants in the diet. And that's a big appeal to me. Thank you. Hello, Janelle. Can you recommend a good left-handed chef's knife from a left-handed girl who needs to slice and dice? Well, now, I don't have any brands to suggest, okay? But let's talk about this for just a moment. Let me first say that, generally speaking, for a European style chef's knife, which is what probably most people in the U.S. use, in Europe as well, I suppose, they are made in a neutral sort of a way. In other words, they can fit equally a left hand or a right hand dominant person. In other words, the blades are double beveled, and the molding of the handle is symmetrical. Okay. Now, if you want specifically a left-handed knife, okay, there's a couple things to consider. If you want a European-style chef's knife, then what you're probably talking about is a handle that's molded or otherwise created in a way to ergonomically, right, fit a left hand. And those are out there. If you do a Google search, you're going to find some options online. Read through some of the details. If you want to bounce some ideas off of me, reach out to me at support@ruby.com. But otherwise, take a look at, just read broadly, take a look at some of the criteria of what makes up a decent knife, right, in terms of features and quality. And then there's another sort of step, right, toward the left-handed or right-handed knife, and that is a blade that's got a single bevel to fit a left hand or right hand cutting pattern. And those are, in my experience, associated with Japanese style knives. Not that all Japanese knives are single beveled. Many of them are double beveled, but this is where I find single beveled blades. It's within the spectrum of Japanese style knives. So if you specifically want a Japanese knife, then take a look online at the many options that are out there, okay? And see what kind of cutting you will do versus the style of knife that you will choose, okay? And let's take it from there. Thank you. All right, next question. I've been dry roasting veggies in glass dishes as I'm not a fan of aluminum and have not invested in steel cooking sheets yet. Is this okay? And what would be the main difference? Yes, you bet it's okay. I mean, the difference is going to be a difference in heat transference to some degree. But if you're getting good results from glass, in other words, you've practiced, you know how to handle that particular material, then all is well. Continue doing what you're doing. All right, thank you. Kathleen asks, what is a pinch bowl? Pinch bowl is going to be just a small size bowl where we can take a pinch of something out of, like salt or pepper, but otherwise, we might refer to a pinch bowl in our courses in the context of mise en place. So if you've got small quantities of things like herbs and spices and salt and pepper, you might use some small bowls to place those things in as you set up for cooking. Thank you. And will this be made available for later viewing? Yes, you bet. All of our live events are archived, so please take a look at those. Thank you. Let's see. Next question from Birutu Khan. Thank you so much. I appreciate you for your help. What is the meaning of pilaf? Pilaf is life. And, pilaf is very, very common. It's a rice dish that appears in many regions of the world. Fundamentally, it's said to have started in the Middle East and then spread out from there. Pilaf or a pulao is strongly associated with Indian cuisine as well. India has a very strong Muslim influence from the Mughals, from points west, coming from the Western Asia and the Middle East. And pulao basically is a very flavorfully prepared rice dish. And, it's one where possible, you're using a flavorful liquid like a stock to produce the dish. And it's got the addition of vegetables. Very often meat might be included if that's your preference. And then also spices. And it might be finished with a fistful of fresh herbs. And so, it's going to be that type of a flavorful rice preparation. Thank you. All right, next question. Do you consider the type of steel important in the selection of knives? Not necessarily. I mean, if you want to have a conversation about, what is considered a good quality knife and why, then yes, we can talk about the type of steel and how it's hammered and this and that. But if we're talking about cooking, then my world is wide open. Okay, in other words, I've got handmade knives, and I've got knives that are made of stamped steel that are considered relatively low quality, but are my workhorses in some cases. And so I don't have a hang up on the type of steel necessarily. Okay, but it really depends on how you want to approach this topic. All right, thank you. All right, Mackenzie, I think I burnt the bottom of my wok. What is your best suggestion to fix this? I don't think I used enough oil after I seasoned it, so it's not smooth on the bottom. Yeah, you want to go ahead and just scrub down that surface and use whatever tool is going to be convenient for you. For example, one of those kind of coarse scrubbies. I use a green colored 3M scrubby and try to kind of scrub it clean back down to the metal and then re-season it and then just start anew and you should be fine. All right, thank you. All right, and Sabrina is asking, I have heard of chickpea tofu. Will that be okay for the tofu section? Yeah, I mean, that's my first answer is yes. I'm not picturing chickpea tofu off the top of my head, but I mean, if it's made in the traditional way of making tofu, and you end up with a smooth, creamy block of tofu, then my answer would be yes. If it's something else, then let's talk, and you can reach out to us at support@ruby.com. And Julie asks, I've been reading labels and comparing soy sauce, Tamari, Bragg's Aminos, and coconut aminos. There's a wide range in sodium content. Can you substitute all of these? Is there a flavor difference? I'll start by saying that there are flavor differences between all of these products. Sometimes the difference is very subtle. Sometimes it's more obvious. And uh, the decision to buy one over the other is 100% up to you from a flavor perspective. It's going to be just what suits your palate and the type of cooking that you're doing. Now, regarding sodium, yeah, once again, the basis of these products is that they provide salt and some additional umami or depth of flavor through the context that's provided, through this flavorful liquid. Um, I recommend comparing them and figuring out what you like to use. That's going to be the best way forward. Thank you. And it looks like the last question is from Trish. Any preferences or suggestions when we're making nut or oat milks? Have been enjoying making my own almond milk, though am sensitive to the environmental damage of growing almonds. Okay. Any preferences or suggestions when making nut or oat milks? So let me first say that in our archives, there is a live event that focuses on these plant-based milks, okay? And that might be fun for you to listen to. But in terms of preference, I don't have a single preference. I think the maybe the couple of things I would like to discuss relative to this topic here is number one, that a homemade product is going to be very different from a store-bought product many of the times. Okay. And if you start reading labels, it's very interesting. You'll discover that store-bought products often are not what they appear to be on the label. For example, I have had flax milk from the store that doesn't contain any flaxseed. It contains flax oil that's been emulsified with some other gums, and to give a stable product. And I've had pea milk that doesn't contain any peas. It just has pea protein as an additive. And so be sure to read products so that you know what you're getting. Now, the downside of making these milks at home, generally speaking, is that they will have a shorter shelf life than their store-bought counterpart. That's generally true with some exceptions. Okay, so that could be a plus or a minus, but I think that does attest to the cleanliness, right, of a homemade product. Now, in terms of choosing, a particular ingredient over another, focus on fat content, focus on the viscosity. For example, oat milk can get sort of viscous. Some people might say snotty in consistency, especially after it sits for a while or if it's been blended for a while. And that does not sit well with some consumers, okay? Flavor intensity, right, is going to be a consideration. So depending on how you will use the product, you might choose to avoid pecan milk because of the robust flavor and instead reach for something more neutral, like cashew milk or macadamia milk, okay? And so those are things that I think about when, I make or sometimes buy these products. I hope that's helpful for you. And I see that the link to the archived live event that talks about plant milks has been posted. Thank you, Patrick. And that brings us to the end of my office hours. And I want to thank all of you for participating today and look forward to seeing you once again. And in the meantime, happy cooking. Bye-bye.